Look, sweetheart, why don't you stay back and handle the radio while the real soldiers do the fighting? Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison's condescending words echo through the forward operating base as 53-year-old retired Master Sergeant Linda Chen prepares for what should be a routine security contractor briefing in Afghanistan. Around the table, younger male contractors smirk and exchange glances, none of them bothering to check her personnel file or notice the combat infantry badge discreetly pinned inside her tactical vest. They see a small Asian woman past her prime and assume she's just another desk assignment trying to play soldier. What happens next will prove that the most dangerous mistake in combat is underestimating your teammates. If you respect the warriors who've earned their place on the battlefield, smash that subscribe button and tell me in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you look? This mission will show them exactly what they're dealing with. Linda Chen had been back in Afghanistan for 3 months as a security contractor, and the disrespect never got easier to swallow. At 53, after 30 years of military service, including 5 combat deployments, she'd taken the contractor job partly for the money, but mostly because she wasn't ready to stop serving. The problem was convincing her new team that she belonged there. Today's mission briefing should have been straightforward. Intel suggested Taliban fighters were planning to attack a supply convoy traveling through the Korangal Valley. Linda's team of 8 contractors would provide additional security support to the regular army escort. But from the moment she walked into the briefing room, the familiar pattern began. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, the team leader barely half her age, looked her up and down with obvious skepticism. The other contractors, all men in their 20s and 30s, followed his lead. To them, she was clearly someone who'd gotten this assignment through connections or quotas rather than qualifications. Jake addressed the room, but kept looking at Linda. All right, people, this is a real mission with real dangers. We're not babysitting tourists here. Everyone needs to pull their weight and follow orders without hesitation. The implication was clear. Linda was the weak link they'd have to compensate for. Chen, Jake said, using her last name like a question mark. You handled communications before, right? Maybe you should coordinate with base radio while we handle the actual security work. Linda had handled a lot more than communications, but her personnel file apparently hadn't made it past the cover page. 3 bronze stars, 2 purple hearts and a distinguished service cross weren't mentioned in these informal contractor briefings. I can handle whatever position you need filled, she replied evenly, the same way she'd responded to doubting commanders for 3 decades. The youngest contractor, a former Marine named Tommy, snorted. No offense, ma'am, but this isn't a training exercise. We're talking about real Taliban fighters who won't go easy on you because you're a woman or because you're old, added another contractor named Price. No shame in staying in your lane. Linda had heard variations of this conversation in Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, and every other deployment where she'd had to prove herself to new teams. The exhausting cycle of assumption, doubt, and eventual grudging acceptance never changed. The mission briefing continued with Jake assigning positions. Linda found herself relegated to the rear vehicle with the radio equipment and medical supplies. Important roles, but clearly chosen to keep her away from direct combat. As they prepared to move out, Jake pulled her aside. Look, Chen, I'm sure you're competent at what you do, but I've got 7 other lives to worry about. Don't try to be a hero out there, okay? Stick to your assigned role and let us handle the heavy lifting. Linda nodded without argument. She'd learned long ago that some people had to see proof before they'd believe anything that challenged their assumptions. The convoy moved out before dawn, 6 military vehicles plus 3 contractor trucks, providing additional security. Linda's vehicle was positioned at the rear, exactly where Jake wanted her to be when trouble started. The ambush came at the worst possible spot in the valley, just as Intel had predicted. A narrow pass with high walls on both sides, limited visibility and no room to maneuver. The Taliban had chosen their ground well. The first RPG hit the lead vehicle, disabling it immediately. Small arms fire erupted from positions on both sides of the pass, creating a deadly crossfire. The convoy was trapped in a kill zone with nowhere to go but forward or back, and both directions were covered by enemy fire. Jake's voice crackled over the radio, already showing signs of panic. We're taking heavy fire. Lead vehicle is down, multiple casualties. Linda assessed the situation quickly. Through her binoculars, she could see muzzle flashes from at least 6 different positions on the ridgelines. The convoy was sitting still, taking casualties, while Jake tried to coordinate a response that wasn't working. Tommy's voice came over the radio next, high-pitched with fear. They've got us pinned down. We can't move forward or back. That's when Linda made her decision. She grabbed her rifle and extra ammunition, then keyed her radio. Jake, I'm moving to flank the Eastern Ridge positions. The response was immediate and furious. Chen, get back in that truck. That's not your assignment. But Linda was already moving, using terrain features she'd spotted during the briefing that the younger contractors had missed. Years of combat experience had taught her to read landscapes like books, finding routes that others couldn't see. The Eastern Ridge had 3 Taliban positions, all focused on the convoy below. They hadn't posted security to their rear because the terrain looked impassable. It wasn't impassable to someone who'd spent 3 decades learning how to move through hostile territory. Linda covered 200 meters of rough ground in 8 minutes, staying low and using every piece of cover available. Behind her, she could hear the convoy still taking fire, and Jake's increasingly desperate radio calls for backup that wouldn't arrive in time. The first Taliban fighter never saw her coming. She took him out with a single shot from a position he thought was secure. The second fighter turned toward the sound, giving away his location. Linda eliminated him before he could fire a shot. The third position was the most dangerous. 2 fighters with an RPG launcher that had been devastating the convoy. Linda had to get close, which meant crossing 30 meters of open ground under potential observation. She made the crossing in a combat sprint that would have impressed soldiers half her age, reaching the Taliban position just as one fighter was loading another RPG round. Her training kicked in automatically. 2 precise shots. Both targets down, threat eliminated. From her new position on the ridge, Linda had clear lines of sight to the remaining Taliban positions on the western side. She began picking off fighters with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this many times before. Jake's voice over the radio had changed from panic to confusion. Someone's taking out the eastern positions. Who's up there? Chen, Tommy's voice answered with disbelief. Chen is up there. Within 15 minutes, Linda had eliminated or suppressed enough enemy positions to allow the convoy to move forward out of the kill zone. She covered their movement from her ridge position, then worked her way back down to rejoin the group. When she reached the convoy, she found 7 contractors and a dozen soldiers staring at her with expressions ranging from amazement to embarrassment. Jake looked like he'd seen a ghost. How the hell did you do that? He asked, his earlier condescension completely gone. Linda checked her weapon and secured her gear before answering. Same way I've been doing it for 30 years. You learn to read terrain, move quietly, and shoot straight. The Taliban weren't expecting someone to come from that direction because they made the same mistake you did. They underestimated what I was capable of. Tommy was shaking his head in amazement. Ma'am, I owe you an apology. We all do. You just saved our lives. Price, the contractor who'd made the comment about staying in her lane, stepped forward. Chen, I looked up your record while we were pinned down. 3 bronze stars? Purple hearts? Why didn't you tell us? Linda shouldered her rifle and started walking back to her vehicle. Because I shouldn't have to show you my medals to earn basic respect. My qualifications were in my file if any of you had bothered to read it. But you saw a middle-aged Asian woman and decided you knew everything about what I could do. Jake jogged to catch up with her. Chen, wait. You're right. We screwed up, all of us. But that back there, that was incredible. I've never seen anyone read terrain like that or move so fast under fire. Linda paused and turned back to face the group. Here's what you need to understand. Every person on your team earned the right to be there. When you assume someone is weak or incompetent based on their appearance, you're not just being disrespectful. You're creating tactical vulnerabilities. Today you almost got people killed because you didn't know what resources you actually had available. The ride back to base was quiet but different. The contractors asked Linda questions about tactics, about her deployments, about techniques she'd used that they'd never seen before. The respect was genuine now, earned through performance rather than demanded through rank. Over the following weeks, Linda became the unofficial mentor for the team. Jake asked her to lead tactical planning sessions. Tommy requested individual training on urban warfare techniques. Price wanted to learn her methods for reading terrain and planning movement routes, but the real change went beyond tactics. The team started looking at everyone differently, not making assumptions about capabilities based on appearance, age, or background. They began reading personnel files completely before missions. They started asking team members about their experience and expertise, instead of assuming they already knew. 3 months later, when the contract period ended, Jake pulled Linda aside for a private conversation. "I've been thinking about what you said that day in the valley," he told her, "about assumptions and tactical vulnerabilities. You didn't just save our lives with your shooting. You taught us something about leadership and teamwork that I'll carry for the rest of my career." Linda smiled. "That's the most important lesson anyone can learn in combat or in life. Everyone has something to contribute if you're smart enough to see it and humble enough to use it." As Linda prepared to rotate home, the team presented her with a small plaque to Master Sergeant Linda Chen, who proved that the most dangerous weapon on any battlefield is an underestimated warrior. She carried that plaque home to her apartment in Colorado, where it joined 30 years' worth of commendations and awards. But this one meant something different. It represented not just what she'd accomplished, but what she'd taught others about the cost of assumptions and the value of looking beyond surface appearances to find the strength that lies underneath. Sometimes the most important battles are won not by defeating enemies, but by proving to allies that strength comes in many forms and courage has no age limit.